Imagine standing on a windswept desert cliff, the sun setting behind you, casting golden rays on the vast expanse of land. Below you stretches a vast network of ancient trading routes, a seemingly endless ribbon of possibility that connects the East and the West. This is the Silk Road, a highway through time that forever altered the course of history. You're witnessing the intersection of empires, the fusion of cultures, the beginning of the globalized world long before the internet and centuries before social media. The Silk Road was more than just a trade route. It was the stage for a silent revolution. Without it, our world would be a drastically different place today. Imagine a world without the spices that transformed European cuisine, the silk that clothed dynasties, the knowledge that ignited the Renaissance, or the ideas that sparked revolutions. The Silk Road didn't just change trade, it changed the very fabric of civilization. But how? Let's unravel the threads of this ancient world-changing journey. The Silk Road's roots stretch back to around the 2nd century BCE when the Han Dynasty in China opened the doors to an ancient world. What began as an ambitious attempt to expand trade, particularly for luxurious silk, quickly transformed into something far greater. An exchange of culture, technology, ideas, and beliefs between the East and the West. The roads were not one single path but a network of interconnected routes that traversed deserts, mountains, and seas, connecting China with Central Asia, the Middle East, and even reaching the edges of the Roman Empire. With caravans loaded with silks, spices, precious stones, and ivory, travelers journeyed through the unknown, bringing with them more than just goods. They carried stories, knowledge, and ideologies that would change the face of the world forever. For centuries, the Silk Road served as the meeting point of two civilizations, one that had perfected the art of papermaking, printing, and gunpowder, and another that had mastered philosophy, mathematics, and astronomy. Imagine Chinese merchants, for the first time, encountering Greek traders and marveling at each other's inventions, languages, and art. This was the very birthplace of global exchange. The flow of ideas, like the flow of goods, was constant. The Chinese invented paper and printing, technologies that would eventually sweep across the world and bring about a revolution in communication. But it wasn't just paper that the East gifted the West. The concept of gunpowder, originating in China, would go on to alter the course of warfare forever, dramatically changing the power dynamics between nations. What if the Mongols had never learned about gunpowder from their Chinese neighbors? Would they have been able to conquer vast swathes of Asia? The very possibility of an empire built on such technology would not have existed without the Silk Road. But the Silk Road's impact wasn't just about technology or luxury goods. It also brought with it ideas that would shape the course of history. Consider the spread of Buddhism from India to China. When traders and monks crossed paths, they didn't just share trade secrets, but philosophies that changed the spiritual landscape of entire continents. What began as a small religious movement in India would, over time, travel westward, influencing the spiritual practices of distant lands. It wasn't just Buddhism, though. Christianity, Islam, Zoroastrianism, and other belief systems also traveled these routes, spreading seeds of thought that would one day bloom into some of the world's largest religions. The Silk Road acted as the great carrier of belief, connecting individuals and civilizations who had never before imagined a world with such a diverse array of ideologies. As the flow of goods and ideas accelerated, the Silk Road became the lifeblood of empires. The Roman Empire, for instance, was forever altered by its interaction with the Silk Road. Romans were drawn to the luxurious silks, exotic spices, and precious stones, but they were equally captivated by the goods they could not touch. Ideas about medicine, mathematics, and astronomy flowed westward, directly influencing Greek and Roman scholarship. The Roman Empire's concept of luxury, once tied to the finest local goods, began to expand to include Eastern treasures. Ideas about wealth and power were transformed by the shimmering allure of the Silk Road. And this was just the beginning. The impact of the Silk Road on the European imagination would go on to spark the Age of Exploration. Without the Silk Road, would Columbus have set sail for the New World, seeking the riches of the East? What if the search for spices, which had first been introduced to Europe through these routes, never existed? The very course of history would have been different. But it wasn't only Europeans who were transformed. The civilizations of the East, the Persians, the Chinese, the Indians, were equally influenced by the cross-cultural exchanges that occurred on the Silk Road. The Persian Empire, for example, acted as a kind of cultural bridge between the East and West. Persian merchants became the intermediaries who connected China to the Mediterranean world, and their influence can still be seen today in the art, architecture, and culture of the Middle East. One of the most profound impacts of the Silk Road was the way it led to the rise of cities that acted as hubs of knowledge, culture, and commerce. Cities like Samarkand and Bukhara became the melting pots of the ancient world, where cultures collided and ideas were born. These cities didn't just grow rich from trade, they became centers of learning, where mathematicians, astronomers, and philosophers from different cultures came together, sharing their knowledge and sparking the intellectual revolution that would fuel the Renaissance. But the Silk Road wasn't all about intellectual and cultural exchange. It was also about the spread of diseases. The most infamous of these, the Black Death, traveled along the same routes that carried merchants and scholars. By the time it reached Europe, it decimated nearly half of its population. The consequences were dire, but they also brought with them sweeping changes. The labor shortage that followed the plague led to the fall of feudalism and the rise of the modern workforce. In this way, the Silk Road wasn't just the birthplace of ideas and commerce. It was also a catalyst for global transformation in ways that were as destructive as they were transformative. And then, there were the Mongols. The Mongol Empire, with its vast stretches of land across Asia, North Africa, and Europe, became an integral part of the Silk Road story. Under the rule of Genghis Khan and his successors, the Silk Road flourished as never before. The Mongols created a unified and stable empire that allowed for the free flow of goods, ideas, and technologies. Their conquests, while brutal, also contributed to the global exchange of knowledge, culture, and goods. Without the Mongols, the Silk Road would not have been able to connect as many diverse regions, and the exchange of goods and ideas would have been less fluid and dynamic. But all empires eventually fall, and so did the Silk Road. The rise of sea routes and the age of exploration began to overshadow the ancient trade routes. The world was changing again, and the land routes became less important. Yet, despite the fall of the traditional Silk Road, its influence didn't disappear. The globalized world we live in today, connected by airplanes, the internet, and instantaneous communication, has its roots in the exchanges that began on those ancient roads. The very concept of a globalized world, where ideas, goods, and people can move freely across borders, was born long ago on the Silk Road. And, even now, the echoes of that exchange can be felt in every corner of the globe. When you think about it, the Silk Road wasn't just a trade route. It was the first true global network, a vast web of interconnectedness that set the stage for everything that came after. It was the first time that humanity had come together on such a massive scale, and the effects of that unity are still with us today. From the spice-laden markets of the East to the scholarly pursuits in the great cities of the West, the Silk Road forever changed how we think, trade, and interact with each other. So, next time you pick up your phone or log onto the internet, think about this. The very concept of connection that we take for granted today has its roots in the ancient paths once traveled by silk traders, merchants, scholars, and conquerors. The Silk Road didn't just change trade, it changed the world, laying the groundwork for a future that is still unfolding today. And that's why, no matter how much time passes, we'll never be able to fully comprehend the profound impact the Silk Road had on the world. It's a story that continues to unfold, shaping our present and our future in ways that no one could have predicted. The Silk Road may have faded into the annals of history, but its influence will remain, forever intertwined with the story of humanity. As you stand on that ancient cliff, watching the golden rays of the setting sun stretch across the land, you begin to realize that the journey of the Silk Road wasn't merely a geographical one. It was a journey of the human spirit. The trade routes that once wound through deserts, mountains, and valleys were not just physical paths. They were conduits of transformation. Empires rose and fell, but what remained constant was the legacy of human connection and the perpetual exchange of ideas, goods, and cultures. The Silk Road's influence didn't stop with the exchange of material wealth or knowledge. It touched every facet of human civilization, from art and literature to cuisine and fashion. Imagine the vivid colors of Chinese silk, now woven into the fabric of European royal garments, or the subtle flavors of spices from India, which would go on to inspire entire culinary traditions around the world. Without the Silk Road, our concept of luxury, art, and even taste would have been vastly different. Entire industries were born from the exchange that occurred along these ancient paths, and the desire for Eastern goods helped shape Western consumer culture in ways we often take for granted today. Moreover, the Silk Road served as a critical catalyst for the development of new technologies. The printing press, which would later spark a revolution in knowledge sharing, was preceded by the introduction of printing technologies from China. The concept of movable type and block printing, initially spread by merchants and monks, eventually made its way to Europe, where it ignited the Renaissance and later the Reformation. Could the Renaissance have unfolded without the exchange of Chinese printing knowledge? It's a thought-provoking question, as the flow of ideas across the Silk Road was more than just cultural. It was technological, and its impact was profound. The road also bore witness to a convergence of artistic traditions. Persian miniature paintings, with their intricate detail, blended with Chinese ink brushwork to create masterpieces that told stories of the world's interconnectedness. The architecture of cities like Samarkand reflected a fusion of Islamic, Persian, and Central Asian styles, showing how the Silk Road acted as a creative melting pot. These artistic and architectural innovations were not isolated to one region, but spread through the corridors of trade, leaving behind a shared cultural heritage that transcended borders. Yet, the Silk Road was not always a peaceful conduit of trade and exchange. It was a road fraught with danger, where empires clashed, bandits lurked in the shadows, and merchants faced unimaginable hardships. Yet, despite the perils, people from all corners of the world continued to traverse these routes, driven by the promise of new horizons, wealth, and knowledge. It was this relentless spirit of exploration and exchange that truly defined the Silk Road, not just as a trade route, but as the thread connecting human aspirations, from the mundane to the extraordinary. As the centuries passed and empires crumbled, the legacy of the Silk Road endured. The world continued to evolve, and as new technologies and ways of communication emerged, the spirit of the Silk Road lived on. It's no coincidence that today's global economy, reliant on trade networks, digital communication, and instantaneous information, mirrors the connectivity that once flourished along these ancient paths. The modern world, in many ways, is a continuation of the Silk Road's journey, a journey that brought people together, bridged gaps, and demonstrated the power of collaboration and shared knowledge. The Silk Road may no longer be the bustling hub of commerce it once was, but its imprint is everywhere. Whether you're scrolling through social media, exchanging ideas with someone halfway across the world, or savoring a dish that has its roots in a faraway land, you're experiencing the legacy of the Silk Road. What once took months, or even years, to transport by caravan is now at the tip of your fingers, a testament to the interconnectedness of our world. In a way, we are all travelers on the modern Silk Road, navigating an ever-connected world where borders are becoming increasingly blurred. The lessons of the Silk Road, of cooperation, exchange, and the transformative power of human connection, are more relevant than ever. And as we continue to build new roads, both physical and digital, we are reminded that the journey is never truly over. The Silk Road may be a chapter in history, but its story, rich with innovation, collaboration, and discovery, is one that continues to unfold.